The thing that interrupted you today was not an escalation. It was a routing failure that your organization has been misclassifying for years. Most leaders interpret the volume of escalations as evidence of complexity. The operation is difficult. The stakes are high. The judgment required is senior. That is why so much of it lands on your desk. This is a flattering explanation. It is also wrong. Pull the last week of escalations, not the strategic calls, the operational ones, the vendor dispute, the scheduling conflict, the customer exception that someone could have resolved but didn't, the budget approval that sat in your inbox for a day and a half before you spent 45 seconds saying yes. Ask one question about each. Was this a decision? Or was this a question that had nowhere else to go? In most organizations, the answer is the second one. The escalation was not complex, it was homeless. An escalation without a threshold is not a decision flowing upward. It is a system defaulting to the only path it knows. When no one has defined what a frontline manager is authorized to resolve, everything becomes a judgment call for someone above them. Not because the problem requires senior judgment, because no one specified that it doesn't. When no one has defined at what dollar amount, at what risk level, at what customer tier, a problem stops belonging to the person who found it and starts belonging to someone else. There is no filter. The system has no way to distinguish between a $15,000 liability and a $500 goodwill call. Both travel the same path. Both arrive on your desk. Both wait for your attention. The escalation is not the problem surfacing. It is the absence of a threshold making itself visible. The information travels with the escalation. Every hand it passes through adds a second-hand version of the original problem. By the time it reaches you, the context is 3 layers of summary from the person who actually saw it. You are not deciding on the problem. You are deciding on a compressed description of the problem, assembled by people who had no authority to solve it on contact. That is not senior judgment. That is latency dressed up as governance. There are 2 costs, and they compound. The first is your time. Every false escalation consumes attention that was meant for the decisions that actually require you. The strategic calls, the ones your title exists to make, get less of your judgment, not more, because your judgment is being spent on routing failures. That is not prioritization. It is triage at executive rates. The second cost is invisible and worse. Every escalation you resolve is a repetition your team did not take. They did not weigh the trade-off. They did not sit with the discomfort of a close call. They did not build the judgment that only comes from making a decision and living with the outcome. Judgment requires reps. You absorb the reps. The compounding is not theoretical. A director who absorbs 100 false escalations a year from their team passes 100 judgment reps up the line. The manager above them absorbs the same pattern from a layer of directors below. 3 years in, the team below has several hundred fewer decision-making reps than a peer team working under defined thresholds. The gap does not close through effort. It closes only when someone stops absorbing the reps. And by then, the habit is infrastructure. The instinct is to fix this with training. Teach people when to escalate. Coach them on judgment. Give them frameworks for knowing when a problem is theirs and when it belongs upstream. This does not work. Not because the training is bad, because it targets the behavior and ignores the structure. People do not escalate because they lack judgment. They escalate because the cost of deciding without permission is higher than the cost of asking. That is not a skill gap. That is a rational response to an environment where the thresholds were never made explicit. The problems that actually needed you, the ones that required real judgment, real authority, real strategic weight, will continue to compete for attention with $500 approvals that should have been resolved 3 levels below. The escalation is not the problem. It is the symptom of an organization that never defined where decisions belong. That is architecture.